Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. Hello, hey guys, good evening, welcome, glad you're here. It's Tuesday night, welcome to Tuesday Night Teaching, everybody. Glad to have you here on the C3 stream. Tuesday night, and just going over my notes and stuff. So last week, if you had a chance to join us last week, I was actually working with some church leadership on some great, wonderful, good things. And so it was a pre-recorded last week. So this week we're live, we're rocking and rolling. But hopefully you got a chance to tune in, right? You guys all went and watched, right? Maybe, hopefully. No worries if you missed it. As always, it's up on YouTube, and you can go back and find it on Facebook as well. But I just was going back over my notes because it's been longer than normally. Normally, it's just every week I do it, right? So I had to go back and remember where we left off from last week. So I think I've done that now, and I think we're good. So I got a cup of tea tonight. We're drinking green tea that's mixed with chamomile. It's called Serene Green. So it may put me to sleep. Chamomile calms you down, but green tea has caffeine. So I don't know. We'll see. Hi, Patty. The types of covenants were interesting. Yeah, so like last week we talked about the Suzerain covenant that was established. So the difference between what would be considered like a parallel covenant with equal parties over and against a vassal state. And God set up in this specific covenant through Moses the vassal state type of covenant. Yeah, good. Glad you liked that. That was good. What else? Throw it in the comments, guys. What do you remember from last week? What did you learn? What did you remember? What did you learn? What do you remember? We'll do a little bit of recap, like we always like to do. If you're joining us for the first time, by the way, if you're tuning in for the very first time, welcome. So glad you're here, or maybe first or second time. We're in the middle of a walkthrough of the Bible, and just kind of taking our time, looking at characters, looking at narratives, looking at stories. We've taken our time in the beginning because of all the groundwork that it's really laid. So you can always go back and look at previous segments. We're on week 9 this week, and we're using a curriculum from a place called Crossways. It's great because it has pictures that help us interpret and understand the Bible, but we also spend a lot of time in the biblical text itself. We kind of bounce around a bit, but if you do have a Bible, great, fabulous, marvelous. We will be bouncing around in there tonight as well. If you don't have one, don't worry. I will put it up on the screen for you. So, yeah, so grab a cup of tea, sit back, relax, and, yeah, let me know what's going on in the comments. Thank you, Sue. We would love to have you come and join us. So, Sue, if you're watching or will watch, glad to have you here, and please do keep coming and joining us. Thank you, Sarah. Tag somebody if there is someone that you think would benefit from joining us for Bible study tonight. All right, you guys ready to rock and roll? Let's do it. Sweet. All right, so this is where we were left off last week. Look familiar? We covered a ton, actually. Like last week was pretty big. So here's the covenant thing that we talked about. That was kind of neat, showing the difference in covenants. 10 Commandments. We talked about 10 Commandments some last week and how the 10 Commandments were set up. And basically what happened in the story most recently, the biggest key figurehead is a guy named Moses. Kind of a big deal in the Bible. And Moses is the vehicle through which God introduces not only the 10 Commandments, but 613 laws, regulations, and a way of life for the Jewish people. Here forward, the Jewish people are going to live according to and with the framework that God puts in place through Moses. So here you have a graphic. The image that we use for God is in the top portion there. It's a circle with arrows going out. The reason the arrows go out is because, and the reason we use that as our image for God, is that a circle is unbroken. It is perfect, circular, round. It has no beginning. It has no end. And just like God, no beginning, no end, perfect circle. It also has arrows going out to help capture the sense of God's orientation and God's character. God's character is always outward focused, outward focused, outward focused. Fabulous. Good. Keep tagging them all, Joe. Way to go. Hannah, come join us. Jeffrey, Philip, Kelly, come be a part of it, guys. We'd love to have you join us. Thanks, Joe, for tagging people. So that's our image for God, and God is kind of oversight to the big picture and the big idea of forming this community, which is all these little people. They look like they're sitting around singing Kumbaya or something. They look like very happy little people here. And at the center of the community that's being formed, really the nation, right? This is what's happening, is God is creating a nation state. He's forming a nation that is established not by like geography and not by a traditional constitution, but by the Ten Commandments and by the laws. That's really is their constitution, is these Jewish laws that will establish them as a Jewish nation state. And this all happens at the foot of a mountain, that God speaks to Moses and through Moses back and forth to the people, and this nation state is formed. The Hebrew people, the Israelite people, sometimes we refer Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. Really confusing. I'm sorry, it's true, but they're all the same thing. Israelites, Jews, Hebrews, depending on what era in history, they were referred to differently, and based on whatever peoples that they were interacting with, they got different names. So it's all the same thing. Jews, Israelites, Hebrews, all the same thing. And God makes them into one big nation state, where theoretically God is the head. God is president, el presidente. God is the king, lord, ruler, master of this nation state. And you see in the bottom of the picture there, kind of like a rectangle with a little building inside of it, and then this other little rectangle. You got a bunch of little rectangles in there. And what that's trying to capture is what was historically called the tabernacle. If you want to go back on the stream to the very beginning, when COVID all happened and we started doing this thing online together, we were in the middle of a series called Temple Steps. If you guys remember that, this is a throwback. Temple Steps, and we talked about on Tuesday nights on this stream where the temple came from and the idea of worshiping in a temple, the Jewish temple. And the Jewish temple has its roots in actually what we learned about last week in what's referred to as the tabernacle. Basically, a mobile, put up, tear down temple. So because God's people did not have a land to call their own yet, they had come to the foot of a mountain, and Moses was led them to this mountain, and then God speaks through Moses to the people to say, okay, from now on, this is who you are, this is how you live, these are the rules and regulations. And at the center of it, you kind of have the Ten Commandments. And they begin this worship practice, and they build tabernacle. They build a tabernacle, a mobile temple, church on wheels. I don't know what yeah, that's probably the best way to it's a church on wheels. That's kind of like what it was. Okay. So at the center of this new Hebrew nation state is not only laws and regulations, but what we would describe, it's a theocracy, a religious government. And so you cannot distinguish. It's not like separation of church and state. Okay, no separation of church and state. Much more along the lines of what we have in modern day Iran, where their government is entwined with and cannot be separated from their religious practices. That's the case here in the Bible. That's the case of what took place here. Their worship and their laws and regulations, their government was all intertwined. Okay, so that's the recap. Oh yeah, here we go. And so it leads, we touched on this briefly at the end last week. The backdrop to this nation state has to do with God delivering them from ancient Egypt. They were in slavery in ancient Egypt. God did some amazing miracles and amazing things through Moses, and then Moses leads them out of slavery. This is the top left panel here. You see that image of God again interacting with, it's a circle of chains to represent slavery, and then you see the arrow leading them out. That's Moses. That's what we refer to as the Exodus. And then what we're going to talk about some tonight is this whole circle thing wandering up to modern day Israel and ancient Israel, for that fact, up on the coastline. This experience of deliverance, largely referred in the Bible to the Exodus, is arguably the most referred to historical experience in the Old Testament. Like Moses and this whole thing with Moses bringing them out of ancient Egypt and establishing the Ten Commandments and really establishing what does it mean to be Jewish. This is like the number one story in the Old Testament and represents God delivering people. So when you get to Jesus, Jesus is a good parallel because he delivers people. He doesn't he delivers them from slavery and bondage, but not slavery and bondage to other people. He delivers them from slavery and bondage to sin, to selfishness, to brokenness, to the inward curvature of our own intentions and will and so forth. So in the Old Testament, you get this incredible story of deliverance that parallels the same story of deliverance that comes with Jesus. And in the same way that God formed a new community in the Old Testament, Jesus now forms a new community in today. We call it the church, right? The Christian people, Jesus followers, whatever you want to call us, crazy people that follow Jesus. He forms a community of mutual service, love, charity, defined not by laws and regulations, but defined by Jesus and his love and his sacrifice. So that's a little bit of a nuanced difference. The Old Testament, the Jewish people were defined by their laws. The New Testament, we are defined by Jesus and his sacrifice, his life, death, and resurrection. So, all right, that brings us to new content tonight. That was all just recap, people. So far, so good. You guys all tracking with me? So far, so good. I'm going to take it as a so far, so good. I don't know. Mixing chamomile with green tea. I normally like just plain tea. I'm one of those oddballs that I like non-mixy tea, non-flavored. That's the word. Non-flavored tea. This, I'm not so sure. It's okay. All right. What's going on with this graphic? All sorts of stuff. There's a ton in here. To be honest with you guys, I mentioned this before in the past couple weeks, that there are going to be certain chunks of the Bible where I would describe it as skimming. You know when you skip a rock and you kind of bounce along the surface and you touch down and then it bounces up and then it touches down. That's what we're about to do. We're about to go skipping rocks through the Bible because there's so many stories and there's so much content that we can cover. We've covered Genesis really well, and we covered the beginning of Exodus. But as you go into the next couple books of the Bible, I got a physical Bible around here. No, I got a... all my physical Bibles are upstairs. Nope. Here we go. All right. Ooh, there you go. There's a big old Bible right there. So I got a big old Bible here. And, boom, dum, 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 dum. No. Here we go. Okay. You see all that? By the end of tonight, hopefully that's what we'll have covered. Actually, like, as of right now, almost. As of right now, we have covered, according to this Bible, 300 pages worth of content. All right, so here's the dealio. Basically, we covered Genesis really well. Exodus, we covered the beginning part really well and the story of Exodus. Then we get into a whole lot of those laws, and you hear tons and tons of laws and what it means to be part of this Jewish community for the rest of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So pretty much 3 books. We're just, I would say skipping, but we are acknowledging that they're loaded with wonderful things. Don't mishear me. We'll touch on little things inside of them, but more or less, these books, if you sit down and you were to read the Bible, just sit down and turn to a page. A lot of people struggle to read Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Exodus, to be frank, the latter part of Exodus, because it's really dense laws that contextually for us don't necessarily even make sense. Like where to wash your hands, or how often to take a bath, or not eating shellfish. Stuff that was really important in the history and in the context of that day and age. That we have to do the hard work of interpreting and relocating within our own narrative. Okay. So, interestingly enough, though, Deuteronomy is the #1 book Jesus quotes. Little known fact. He quotes Deuteronomy a lot because threading through all of those books, one of the big themes has to do with, yes, law is good, but the reason we have, why do we have these laws and what do these laws do? Okay, rather than just simply looking at laws as a bunch of really boring do nots, the Bible is trying to convey to you and trying to convey to me, God isn't just someone who just says no, 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 no to all these things, though there's a lot of things that we should say no to, but it's trying to get at the heartbeat of why God is doing these things and for what reason and for what heart behind the law, so to speak. So God, through the law, is trying to show us how to love each other and how to love him. And so this is not surprising actually in Deuteronomy that Jesus quotes Deuteronomy a lot, because Deuteronomy, one of the big refrains is, basically love God with all you got, all you are. Heart, soul, and mind, body, everything you are. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Like that's pretty much what the summary statement of all those 613 laws described in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's pretty much the snapshot. So don't be offended if we took our time in Exodus and spent like from Genesis to Exodus, we spent 9 weeks, and then we're skipping like 3 books right now. But don't be offended. All right. Let's get back to the narrative. Here's what happens next. They wander in the desert. That's what happens next. The next big chunk of the Bible is they become this great nation state. Everybody's on board. It's a hoopla. Things are happening. Now, doesn't go perfect. Don't mishear me. There's a golden calf incident in there that's actually quite famous as well. And basically, as soon as the people are out of Egypt, they start bringing with them the practices of Egypt. Now, this is ironic. Why? Because in Egypt, they were slaves. They didn't have it high rolling. They didn't have a good life in Egypt. Why in the world would you bring the practices and the attitudes? And God went out of his way to show how defunct Egypt was. God went out of his way to show how the oppressive, powerful nature and dichotomies and value sets that they lived under and within were not his design and his desire. And yet here they go, they get out into the wilderness, and like one of their first things is like, well, we got to worship someone. And Moses is literally up the road with God. He's on the mountain with God, and they're like, yeah, but we can't see him, so let's make something we can see. And so they make a golden calf. It's not a highlight reel moment for the Jewish people, okay? God is very unhappy, understandably so. Moses comes down the mountain. Not many people realize that this is part of the story. Moses comes down the mountain. The first thing he do is he breaks the 10 Commandments because he's so angry. He doesn't, I don't know. Some of you might have seen some of those cartoons of like, the 15 crash, 10 Commandments, where he like drops a stone tablet. Very funny. Yes, I get it. But the irony is he actually does break the original 10 Commandments because he's so furious. He's like, guys, I just went to go talk to God. You just told me like the other day you guys are on board with becoming God's people, and then when I go and get the 10 commandments, y'all make your own gods? Are you kidding me? But what they're doing is they're bringing their habits and their practices that they lived with Egypt. In Egypt, the Egyptians had idols. They had golden calves. They had golden cats. They had all these funky gods that they would pray to and made up their religious systems, right? So simply put, the Jewish people at this point in time were adopting and bringing with them the baggage from Egypt. Now, on top of that, even though they finally get on board with God himself, and they get on board with this whole new nation state, they get on board with living under this new set of laws and regulations and really defining what it means to be a nation together. They get on board with it. And then they go start following Moses. And Moses is to bring them to ancient Israel. He's to bring them to the quote-unquote promised land. God basically says, look, a long time ago I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, your forefathers, I promised them that I would bring you to a land flowing with milk and honey, baby. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be gorgeous. You're going to be able to kick back, relax, and enjoy the sunset on a gorgeous, fruitful land, okay? You toiled in Egypt under the oppression of the pharaohs. I'm going to bring you to a place that you can call your own. You can build houses there. You can plant vineyards there. It's going to be beautiful, right? This all sounds very good. A land flowing with milk and honey. The people are on board with saying, okay, this sounds good. But all the way along, as they head their way to the promised land, they drag their feet. They're saying one thing, doing another. And shortly after the experience has been embarked, they've started moving towards the promised land. They've started off as a new nation, headed towards ancient Israel. They start complaining. They grumble, they complain, it's horrible. Oh, it's just obnoxious. It's division, divisiveness. They make fun of Moses when he's not looking. They complain about the food. They complain about the water. Bad stuff starts happening like left and right because they're not being just faithful and honest with each other and with what's going on. All they do is complain. And they lose confidence in Moses. Moses has to go before God time and time again saying, please be patient, God, with these people. Please be patient with them. They're stubborn. They're hard-headed. They're stiff-necked people. But, well, they're your people. You delivered them, so, we could really use some grace, God. And that's what God does. He pours out grace and grace and grace and more grace and forgiveness on these people. But this whole era in the narrative, in the story, is God basically dragging them through the desert as they complain is pretty much what it boils down to. Finally, they end up arriving at the door of the promised land. Okay? They end up arriving at the door. And let's read it together because this is like the epitome to show you what's going on. All right, here we go. They arrive at the door of the promised land. I am in Numbers. If you're curious and want to follow along, I am in a book called Numbers, and I am in chapter 13. Up until now, they have come wandering through the desert and finally arrived at the door of Canaan, ancient Israel. Okay, before they lived there, it was known as Canaan. There we go. The Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So they were made up of tribes at this time. They could each trace their heritage and their family line back to the 12 sons of Jacob. For those of you who can track with me on that, it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons. All of the Hebrew people can track their lineage back through and to those 12 sons. And so there are now 12 tribes that make up this nomadic nation. Okay? So he says, take one person from each of the tribes and send them as spies. Send them into the land. Go send them as scouts to explore the land. So he does. It gets all these dudes. There's a name. All the tribes are represented. Okay. When Moses sent them up to explore Canaan, he said, go up through the Negev and into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good? Is it bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? That's a big deal because they're thinking about being farmers. If they're gonna reside there, if they're gonna take up residence there, if they're gonna shack up in ancient Israel, they want to know, hey, is it fertile or poor ground? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So that's what they do. Boom, they go up. They've been wandering in what we would largely consider to be, it's referred to in the Bible as wilderness, kind of like desert, very barren, very rocky area. A subsection of kind of what we would look at as the Arabian Peninsula. Not a lot of trees, not a lot of fertile soil. And all of a sudden they're starting to wind their way now to the Mediterranean coast and to the rains that can come along that area. And it's a little bit more mountainous, a little bit more hilly, and the rains would fall on the hills and they would create flood zones in the hills. They would create floods because you'd get a bunch of rain and the rain would wash down the hillsides into the valleys. And so the valleys of Israel are pretty fertile. They're nice. They're good. In fact, if you literally go there today, that's exactly what it is today. The fertile areas are the valleys. The valleys are loaded with fertile, growable farming communities literally today. Same as it was back then. Mountains, a little more barren, a little bit more sparse, but it's because the rain would wash down the mountains and the soil at the bottom in the valleys would prove to be very good farming. So these spies go up there, all right? And it's gorgeous. I mean, there's pomegranates and there's figs and grapes, and they go up there and they start checking all this stuff out, and it's like, wow, look at this place, lots of pros. Ancient Israel looking really nice to a bunch of nomadic desert going compadres. They've been in nothing but sand, and they're looking around and it's like, oh my gosh, pomegranates and figs. There's clusters of grapes. This is cool. However, notice this when they report back on the exploration. They came back to the community with Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at the Kadesh, the desert of Paran. There they reported to them in the whole assembly, and they showed them the fruit of the land. So they literally bring back proof that the land is solid. It's good. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's the fruit. Here's the evidence to show you how awesome this land is. But I am known for saying in sermons, buts are big in the Bible. 'Tis true. Here's a big but. So, whenever you use the word but, it immediately negates whatever came directly before. Okay? In a sentence, that's what the word but means. Delete whatever came before. That's why you never say to your spouse, honey, I love you, but, and then you say something, because the whole I love you part just got deleted. It's stricken from the record. Never use the word but like that. But immediately disqualifies whatever preceded it. So whatever they're about to say is more important and outweighs flowing with milk and honey. Here's what they say. The people who live there are powerful, and their cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Basically, they're scared of the people, the indigenous people. But not all of them. There are 2 of the 10 spies. Well, let's just keep reading. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report of the land. All the people we saw there were of great size. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. So basically, Caleb, and I skipped past it, but there's another dude that's really important in this story. Here we go. Another guy was Joshua. Okay. So let's just keep reading. I think it'll name him next. Yeah, okay. This shows the kind of the mentality of the people. God has promised Moses, and through Moses, the entire nation, that they are going to own this land. They are going to, everywhere they, if they enter the land, God will give it to them. Okay? And so Moses sent the spies to go check it out. The spies come back, and 10 out of the 12 say, "No way we can do it." 2 of the 12, Caleb and Joshua, say, God promised it to us. Why? Like, what's the issue, guys? God said we're going to get it. Why would we not go get it? God said go get it. So we should just do what God said, which is go get it, and we should go get it. Who cares if they're bigger than we are? We got God on our side. But instead, this is how people respond. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices, and they wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword?" By the way, do you notice who's at fault here? Whose fault is this? Do you notice that? Whose fault? Who are they blaming? That would be God. They're blaming God for delivering from Egypt, helping them find their way through a vast desert. And now they're saying, God brought us here only to let us fall by the sword. Oh my gosh. Our wives and children would be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us if we had gone back to Egypt? Do you remember the good old days where we had a good solid, we had steady work. That's for sure. They were slaves. Of course they had steady work. We had steady work, and we didn't have to be worried about fighting other nations. That's because they weren't allowed to have an army. The Egyptians were their oversight and were too busy killing off their own kids. The Egyptians were killing the Hebrew kids to prevent them from becoming an army. Oh my gosh. We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. I mean, do you get a sense here of problems? Can you and isn't it true that in our own lives, before you come down too harsh on these people, isn't it true that we do this too? God will do something amazing in our lives, and then time passes, and we forget. We start thinking about it a little different. It seems so long ago, etc., etc., etc. And all of a sudden, we're back to blaming God or being mad at God, even though there was a point in time in our life where God intervened in a significant way, right? We'll have these big spiritual mountaintop moments, And a month later, it's like, the world is ending. Oh, woe is me. But that just seems to be the nature of people. We are forgetful, and we are stubborn, and we are stiff-necked. Yet God is gracious enough to be patient with us. So, anyways, all right, sorry, that was preaching at you. They basically they're like, maybe we should just replace Moses. Moses, Aaron fall on the ground, face down. They're just like, oh my gosh, you gotta be kidding me. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, who were among those who would explore that, they tore their clothes. So Joshua and Caleb tear their clothes and they say, the land we pass through is good. It's exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he'll give it to us. And here's the real issue. Only do not rebel against the Lord. That's who they're that's who their real beef is with. It's not with Moses. Their beef is with God. That's who their beef is with. Their issue, the people's issue, is with God and whether or not they're going to be faithful to what God has asked of them. Do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. So here you have like Moses, Aaron, Joshua, and Caleb saying, we've got God on our side, man. What are you all thinking? Well, it doesn't go well. The whole assembly talked about stoning, that is, executing them. God shows up and he is mad. Ooh, God is not happy. How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs I performed against them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them. But I will make you a nation greater and stronger than they. So basically he's like, man, forget all these people. If they that hard-headed, we'll just kill them off and start over with you four. Moses is like, no. If you do that, the Egyptians are going to hear about it. I mean, this is not good. Can't we do something else, God? The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. So, the compromise is this. God says, all right, the people who thought Egypt was so great and wanted to go back to Egypt, wander their way back and around to Egypt, they were not ready to go into the land that I had promised them, and so they never will. They're going to go back out into the desert, and they will just die off by natural causes. They will live their lives, and they will die off, and I will give it to their kids and their grandkids. I will do what I promised to do with the next generation, because hopefully the next generation will not be bemoaning and wishing they were back in Egypt, because they never knew Egypt. They didn't grow up in Egypt. So God's like, we're just going to take it. We're going to let this generation die off and start with the kiddos. And hopefully the kiddos are going to trust me, because they're going to remember the stories of how God delivered, the family from Egypt. So that's the plan. They go wandering back. If you look in this graphic here, you see how the arrow goes out from Egypt, down to the mountain down there, back up, and then you see a little number 9. That's the scouting part. And then it goes back down. And that's when they turn around. Stinko. They wander back in the desert, and that whole generation dies. God just waits them out. Eventually, they start heading back north. If you follow the numbers, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Things happen at all those numbers, but we're just not going to get into the details right now. But different stories happen at each of those numbers. Eventually, what happens is the generation dies out, and the whole nation finds themselves now back way up north, looking at the land flowing with milk and honey. Okay, they're looking at ancient Israel. Before they were looking at it from number 9 to the south. Now they are looking at it from farther north, and they're looking what would be westward. Okay, so they've wandered up on the east side on your screen, the right side of the Jordan River, and the Sea of Galilee's way up there, and this is this blue right in there. So they are now facing ancient Israel, ready to go in. Moses dies looking at the promised land. He does not get to enter. It's kind of a bummer. Let's read about it. Deuteronomy. God tells him he's going to die outside of the promised land. So it's kind of a sad thing. Moses himself had some issues when they were wandering around. He himself, for as faithful as he is, he makes a couple big mistakes. He makes one really big mistake. He makes a big old mistake where he, rather than letting God work through him, he commands God to do something. He uses the power, authority that God had given him for his own purposes. And it's no good. It's no good. God's like, oh, Moses. He's furious with Moses at that point. But because Moses has been so faithful for so long, God does not strike him down. He says, look, Moses, you've been a faithful servant to me all these years. And even though you just committed like the ultimate crime, abusing my power, abusing your authority, the punishment will be that you will live out all of your days. I will continue to bless you. I will continue to speak with you. I will continue to use you. You will continue to lead your people. All good, all good, all good. And at the end of your days, you won't be able to retire in the promised land. You're going to die just outside of the promised land. So it's kind of like a bittersweet moment, because in some ways it's a gift that God says, look, I will give you the gift of looking at this land that you have spent all these years dreaming and vision casting for, right? Telling people every day, God's got a promised land out there in front of us. God's got a promised land out there in front of us. You'll be able to witness it. You'll be able to stand on a mountain and see it with your own 2 eyes. So let's read it. This is Deuteronomy. This is where Moses dies. This is Deuteronomy, the death of Moses, 34. He goes to a mountain called Mount Nebo, across from Jericho. Yeah, there you go. This is probably a better image for you. So I'm skipping ahead just a touch. Nah, we can be here. So if you look in this image, what we've done is we've zoomed in. So if I go back towards the end there, where that number 12, 13, 14, 15. You see all that right there in Jericho. It's kind of on about a third of the way down from the top, and on the far right side, you'll find Jericho. Okay. Now we zoom in on that area. We're zooming in on that area. Okay. So you can see Jericho there right above the blue blob in the bottom. And then to the right of the blue blob, you also see Mount Nebo. And that's where we are picking up oh, none of you could see that because I was on the wrong one. Hold on a minute. Sorry. All right, here we go. Okay, so here we go. 12, 13, 14, 15. About a third of the way down, right-hand side. Now we zoom in. The blue blob on the bottom. To the right of that, Mount Nebo. The blue blob is the Dead Sea. And this little squiggly line going north, that's the Jordan River. And then way up at the top is the Sea of Galilee, which is very important when we get to the time of Jesus. So there you go. Mount Nebo. There's Mount Nebo. And that's where we pick up. That's where Moses dies. He's on a mountain looking over the Promised Land. Moses climbs Mount Nebo. And then God speaks to him. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to your ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Just a small note there. The reason I impressed upon you guys in earlier streams, these three now, they always come together. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These are the patriarchs. They are the three that led the way, so to speak. Okay. So these are the famous ancestors. This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over into it. And with that, Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said. He buried him in Moab, the valley opposite. But to this day, no one knows where his grave is. He was 120 years old. This is kind of cool. Yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. That's cool. There's some theology to be unpacked there. The Israelites, surprise, they grieved for his loss. Well, that's, I guess, pleasant, but frankly is a bit of a surprise because they just did. Anyways, I won't. Martin Luther teaches us to think well of our neighbors, so I will choose my best to think well. And so Moses dies, and this other guy named Joshua, son of Nun. Where did we hear his name before? Oh, that would be like 2 seconds ago when we looked at one of the spies. The one who said, hey, why are we not following what God said? That guy. Joshua ends up being now the new leader. Joshua, Moses's mantle of leadership passes on to Joshua, son of Nun, who was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid hands on him. So the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all the signs and wonders the Lord had sent to Egypt and Pharaoh and his officials throughout the whole land. No one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. And so that closes the chapter on Moses. Moses himself is the biggest figure next to Jesus in our faith. Moses is bigger than Abraham in many. Maybe I can't say that. They're pretty dang close. I mean, they're pretty dang close. But I think a case can be made that Moses is probably arguably bigger because of the Exodus narrative and because he's the lawgiver. Everything that defines what it means to be Jewish from now on was established under Moses. The promise came through Abraham, and Moses is the one who really defined what it meant to be God's people. Does that make sense? Yes, Joe. Who is the author? It continues after Moses died. So, correct. So if you look at the Bible, according to the Bible itself, Moses was the author of the first 5 books, what we refer to as the Pentateuch, Genesis up through Deuteronomy. There are, however, that would be a very, very literal reading of the Bible, okay? What I would advocate for and encourage is seeing and understanding Moses's voice as a dominant voice, but maybe not exactly the only voice. Like, for example, how could he narrate his own death? We've been looking at his death. How does a guy narrate his own death once he's dead? Like, it's kind of a tough one, right? So, yeah. Moses is, without question, probably the primary. I mean, he's a primary contributor, if not the primary contributor. He's the one who defines the Jewish laws, nation state, the stories, so forth. And yet I personally find within my own faith practice that there is space to see his voice alongside other voices within the Jewish fabric and practice. Right. For example, Joshua. Joshua is a great example. So, Joshua, and believe it or not, Joshua pops up in the other books regularly. He's a character that we're going to study now, but he's actually been present going all the way back to Exodus. You can see him popping up in the other books of the Bible. So Joshua is another example of a contributing voice. It's kind of like, now things are kind of handed over to Joshua. And so Joshua leads the charge. Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom. And so he becomes a primary voice, right? So, Moses and Joshua as leaders would have had scribes and people with them and orators who are consolidating information and passing it along, so forth. And one of the big things that I should mention as well is that one of the practices that we see in the laws is the importance of telling stories over and over and over again. One of the things God actually commands the Jewish people to do is tell specific stories to their children. It's a command. It's not an option. It's a law. It's a regulation. You are supposed to gather your kids together and tell them, for example, the Exodus story during Passover. Like you're required to tell your kids the stories. Okay. And so, these, Moses and other leader voices were probably the ones who shaped and formed those stories, codified them, if you will. But yes, there would be other voices alongside of Moses's that would have contributed to the history, the lineage, the practice, etc., etc. But it can be kind of confusing because the Bible said, Moses wrote this book. But, well, here Moses is dead. So, here's an example of him being honored by a voice, potentially Joshua's voice. Because that's what happens next. Look at this, ready? Deuteronomy, turn the page to Joshua. So now you get a new book of the Bible. You get a book called Joshua. It begins with the transition, the succession plan of moving from Moses now to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide. So Joshua had actually been tracking with Moses for ages. And Moses had been discipling, preparing, and getting Joshua ready. Some of the famous verses, like, for example, with Joshua, as Joshua stood outside the tent of the tabernacle when Moses was inside. He was the guy who was right outside the tent when Moses had like one-on-one time with God in the tabernacle, the mobile church. Joshua is the guy who was the doorkeeper. Another famous story and verse with Joshua was, as for me, my household, we will worship the Lord. The golden calf affair. Joshua is specifically named as one of the people who stayed faithful and did not worship the golden calf. Joshua, while Moses was up the mountain, Joshua was running around telling people, no, don't do this, abstain from this. This is evil. This is not good. And so Joshua, becomes the second in command to Moses. God speaks to him. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set foot, as I promised Moses. And then he goes on to give him kind of the details. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead the people to inherit the land that I swore to give their ancestors. Be strong and courageous. Do you get a theme? Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. So, this is God kind of setting up and installing Joshua now. But, he's saying, look, I'm with you. I'm on board. I will be with you. And here are some things that you need to know, Joshua. One, what you are being called to do, lead these people, is not easy. You saw that with Moses. It's tough being a leader. It's tough. You are going to make a lot of people mad. You are going to have to be faithful to me. You are going to have to balance a stiff-necked and stubborn people and lead them. It's not easy. So be strong. Be courageous. Be strong. Be courageous. Be strong. Be courageous. You guys get it. And then alongside of that, you should know you need to live into the laws. The covenant that I set up with Moses now passes to you. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. So the laws that God set up with Moses, they don't die with Moses. They get passed on now. They belong to the people. The laws belong to the people. And so now Joshua is responsible for making sure that the people follow those laws, the 10 Commandments, right? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. This is one of the most famous. This is on t-shirts all the time. They never have the first part. Have I not commanded you? But this is one of the more famous verses in the Bible, Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be terrified. Do not. I see even is be afraid. Depends on what translation. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. All right, gang. That is as far as we're gonna get for tonight. We got through the wilderness wanderings, and we are perched right on the edge of diving into the promised land. Not bad. Yeah. Okay. We got a couple minutes just to wrap it up. So yeah, this looks pretty good to me. We got through the wilderness wanderings. We just did like 3 books worth of coverage, which is good. And we got just dipping our toes in Joshua. What happens next is fabulous. It's brutal. It's there's a lot to Joshua and Judges. We'll try to cover Joshua and Judges, 2 books next time we get together. If you guys got questions, as always, drop them in the comments for me so that I can respond to them. And then let me wrap up with you guys. A couple last things as always. Thanks for hanging out tonight. Hope it was enjoyable for you. Hope you guys had a good time learning, growing, and checking things out. As always, I like to remind you, hang out with me not only on Tuesday nights, but do it on Thursday mornings if you like. Come and be a part of me and the rest of the crew on Thursday mornings for some morning meditation, 7:30 in the a.m. So if you're free and you think you might enjoy that, what we do is we read the Bible together, we do some praying together, and then I do some Holy Spirit shout-outs together. Holy Spirit shout-outs are really a lot of fun too. So come join us 7:30 a.m. And then as always, come and hang out and be a part of Sunday mornings. We're wrapping up our sermon series called Give Thanks this coming Sunday. So before we transition to get ready for Christmas time is near. But I can't sing that yet because it's not even Thanksgiving. So come give thanks with us, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30. Invite somebody, tag somebody, come and join us on site or online. Both are good. We'd love to have you come and be part of that and join, hang out. So thanks for joining me tonight. Thanks for being part of the C3 stream. If you want, like I said, come join me on Thanksgiving Day. I am going to be streaming in that morning, so you can start off your morning with giving thanks. That'd be swell and wonderful. You can join me then. Otherwise, we will see you guys on Sunday morning. Thanks for joining us, guys. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, John. Great. Happy Thanksgiving. That's right, guys. Happy Thanksgiving to both of you as well. Hope you guys had a great time joining and tuning in tonight. So thanks so much. And yeah. If you get, like I said, if you got comments or questions, you want to drop them in the comments section. I'll do my best to give you guys a response, and we'll tie it into next week. But otherwise, we'll pick it up next week with week 10. Pick it up with Joshua. Joshua and Jericho. The battle of Joshua and fought the battle of Jericho. Jericho. Yeah, we got some singing to do next week. Maybe I'll talk my girl. No, they'll be asleep. I was going to say the girls could do the... do you guys know the Walls? The Walls song, and the walls came a tumbling down. Oh, that's the same song. Walls came a tumbling down. There's signs that go to it. Anyways, okay, I'm rambling. Sorry, forgive me. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for being here this night. God bless you. Can't wait to see you again Thursday morning for Thanksgiving morning meditation. Otherwise, we'll see you on Sunday. Thanks for tuning into the C3 stream. Go live some lives. Go elevate Christ. Go be a church for those who aren't here yet. And we'll talk to you and see you soon. God bless, guys. Have a great night.